I still remember the first time we met. It wasn't anything grand, nothing that would make for a cinematic love story, but it felt perfect. We had met online, through a mutual interest, just a few casual conversations here and there, but quickly, it was clear that we shared something deeper, a connection that felt effortless. We'd stay up late talking about everything and nothing, sharing our hopes, our dreams, our fears. It wasn't love at first sight, it was something subtler, something more genuine. It was easy to be myself around him, in a way I hadn't been with anyone before. We hit it off almost immediately. We understood each other, even in silence. There was no pretense, no need to impress. Just two people who liked each other for exactly who they were. I felt safe with him. That was the word that always came to mind. Safe. I trusted him completely, not just because he earned it, but because, from the very start, it felt natural to do so. As the months passed, we grew closer. Our relationship didn't have the pressure or the drama that some people talked about. We had our occasional disagreements, of course, but nothing ever felt insurmountable. We always worked things out. He was thoughtful and caring. He would surprise me with little gestures, thoughtful words, even just a quiet night in with a movie we both loved. It was the kind of love that felt like home, and it was effortless. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. We didn't rush things. Our relationship grew slowly, but it grew with a sense of comfort that I had never known before. I was in love, yes, but more than that, I felt like I was in the right place. With him, I didn't have to question who I was. He accepted me fully, flaws and all, and I did the same for him. We built a life together. We moved in together, planned a future, and set dreams in motion. We had discussed everything, and one thing that stood out to me in particular was our shared understanding about boundaries. From the very beginning, we agreed on one simple rule: cheating would never be a part of our relationship. We didn't need to worry about jealousy or doubts. Trust was everything to us, and we both vowed to never cross that line. There was no need for insecurity. We told each other we had something special, something that couldn't be broken. We weren't a perfect couple. No one is, but we had a foundation that felt solid, something real and worth holding on to. And for those first few years, I believed nothing could break it. I believed in us. I believed in him. When we first started dating, there was an undeniable sense of trust between us. It wasn't something we had to work at or force. It just was. Trust seemed to come naturally, built on the conversations we had, the laughter, the honesty, and the vulnerability we shared with one another. It was a bond that felt effortless, unshakable. He told me often that I was the love of his life, and I believed him. I felt the same way. I felt secure, knowing that we had this unspoken understanding, that we were on the same team, no matter what. For both of us, trust was non-negotiable. We had both come from different backgrounds, different experiences, but we shared one core belief, that the foundation of a strong relationship is built on mutual respect and trust. He had been through a difficult past, an ex who had cheated on him, and I knew how deeply that had affected him. He often talked about how it had left scars, not just on his heart but on his sense of self. I could see the damage it had done to him, the way he had learned to question people's intentions, the way he had to rebuild himself after that betrayal. But despite his past, he was open with me. He shared his fears, his pain, and I listened. I understood, and that's why, in the beginning, I didn't feel the need to worry. He'd tell me he loved me, and I believed him. He'd reassure me, even when I didn't ask, that he was fully committed to me and to us, and I reciprocated. There was no need for jealousy, no need to question his intentions. I was his priority, and he was mine. We had set boundaries early on, and they were clear. We didn't need to define the rules of our relationship over and over. They were already understood. We were loyal to each other, both emotionally and physically. It wasn't just about trust in the absence of temptation. It was about trust in the small, everyday things. Trust that when he said he'd do something, he would. Trust that when we faced challenges, we would face them together, as a team. Trust that when I felt vulnerable, I could lean on him, and that he would support me. For a long time I didn't even think about the idea of him betraying me. The thought didn't cross my mind. Why would it? We had everything. A deep, loving connection, clear boundaries, and a sense of security that didn't need to be questioned. I thought we had built something that was solid, something that couldn't be shaken by anything or anyone. In those early years, everything felt simple. We didn't have to question each other's loyalty. We trusted each other completely, and that was enough. But as time went on, I would come to realize that trust, no matter how strong, can sometimes be fragile. It only takes a small crack, a single misstep, to start weakening the foundation. It started with a small, seemingly insignificant moment. I was playing on his computer, something I had done countless times before, without thinking much of it. But this time, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A notification popped up in his email, one I couldn't ignore. It was from an OnlyFans model. At first I brushed it off. He had a lot of notifications from various sources, and I figured it was just one of those things that slipped through the cracks. But the more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I felt. I tried to laugh it off at first, making a joke about it. I didn't want to make a big deal out of something that seemed minor, and I didn't want to come across as insecure or controlling. But the discomfort lingered, and I knew I had to address it. So, I gently brought it up to him. I told him that it made me uncomfortable, that I didn't like seeing him focus on one specific person, especially when we had always been clear about our boundaries. I told him I didn't mind if it was general content, or something that wasn't centered around a single person, but I asked him to refrain from seeking out content that focused on one individual. In that moment, I didn't think it would be a big deal. I expected him to understand and respect my feelings. After all, we had been together for years, and we had always communicated openly with each other. But his response was calm, even a bit dismissive. He didn't see it as a problem. He didn't understand why it bothered me so much, and he didn't think it was any different from looking at any other kind of content. I could tell by the way he shrugged it off, that he didn't take my discomfort seriously. He assured me that it wasn't cheating, that it didn't mean anything, and that I was overreacting. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the act itself, but about how it made me feel. I told him that when he sought out content like that, it made me feel invisible, like I wasn't enough, like he was looking for something I couldn't give him. I tried to explain my feelings without sounding accusatory, but it felt like my words were falling on deaf ears. That was the first time I realized that our understanding of boundaries, our shared values, might not be as aligned as I thought. His lack of understanding, his lack of regard for how I felt, shook me. I began to wonder whether I had been too naive, too trusting in our relationship. Was I asking too much? Was I overreacting? I had always been confident in my trust in him, but in that moment, the seed of doubt was planted. I decided to set a boundary then and there, something I never thought I would have to do. I asked him not to engage with content that focused on specific people, especially women, because it made me feel bad about myself. I didn't want to control what he did, but I needed him to respect my feelings. I wanted to believe that this would be the end of it, that he would respect my wishes, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this small incident was the beginning of something much bigger. After that conversation, I tried to convince myself that everything would be fine. He promised he would respect my wishes, that he would stop seeking out content that made me uncomfortable. I thought we had communicated clearly, and I believed that setting this boundary would be enough. But even though he said he understood, there was a part of me that couldn't let go of the unease that had settled inside me. It wasn't just about the content itself, it was about what it represented, a shift in our dynamic, a crack in the trust that had once felt unbreakable. I wasn't asking him to stop looking at things online. I wasn't asking him to change who he was. What I was asking for was respect for my feelings, for my comfort, for the boundaries that we had set together. I needed him to acknowledge that this was important to me, not just as a request, but as a sign of care for the relationship we had built. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was being too sensitive, that I should let it go. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that it was just harmless browsing, that I was overthinking it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the first time I had really asked for something, and he hadn't fully understood why it mattered. So, I set a new boundary. I told him that if he was going to look at anything, I didn't mind as long as it wasn't focused on one specific person. I didn't want to see him constantly looking for one woman, one type of girl, or one particular person that had no real connection to us. I told him it wasn't about the content itself, but about how it made me feel. I told him that when I saw him searching for specific women, it made me feel inadequate, like I wasn't enough. I didn't expect him to stop looking at things altogether, but I needed him to respect that there were certain things that hurt me. The boundary was simple: focus on general content, not individuals. No more searches for specific people, especially not the ones that made me feel like I wasn't measuring up. I told him that this was important for the relationship, and for my emotional well-being, and that I was asking this not out of control, but out of love, for us, for our future. He agreed, of course, but I noticed something in the way he responded that gave me pause. It wasn't an enthusiastic agreement. It wasn't even an apology for crossing the boundary in the first place. It was more of a reluctant acceptance, as if he were agreeing to something that didn't really make sense to him, but he was willing to comply, because I was asking it. And as I said those words, as I drew that line in the sand, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of uncertainty. Was this the right thing to ask for? Was I being unreasonable? I wanted to believe that setting boundary was healthy for our relationship, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that perhaps I was asking too much. It wasn't just about the content. It was about something deeper. It was about how we respected each other's emotional space, about how much we were willing to compromise for each other's comfort. I wanted to believe that setting that boundary would change things. I wanted to believe that once I articulated my discomfort, once I told him how it made me feel, he would understand and respect my needs. But the truth is, I started to notice the cracks in our agreement almost immediately. The first time he crossed the boundary again, I hesitated. I didn't want to confront him right away. Maybe it was just a slip-up, I told myself. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. But then it happened again, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. It was a slow process, but every time I found myself coming across something that didn't align with the boundary we had set, a little part of me broke. Each time I confronted him, and each time his response was the same, a dismissive, "It's not that big of a deal," or "You're overreacting." He didn't see it the way I did. For him it wasn't a violation. For him it was just content, something harmless, nothing to be upset about. But for me, each incident chipped away at the trust that had once felt unshakable. I found myself walking on eggshells, second-guessing everything I felt. Was I truly being unreasonable? Should I just let it go? The constant back and forth between trusting my instincts and questioning my own emotions was exhausting. I began to wonder if maybe I was asking too much, but the nagging feeling that something wasn't right wouldn't leave me. Every time I brought it up, I tried to remain calm, but inside, I was falling apart. I would tell him how it made me feel, how it hurt my self-esteem, how it left me questioning my worth. He'd listen, but I could tell that he wasn't truly hearing me. I was starting to feel invisible in this relationship, like my feelings didn't matter as much as his comfort, his habits, his needs. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that big of a deal. After all, it was just some images online. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about the content. It was about respect. It was about boundaries. It was about a fundamental disconnect between what I needed and what he was willing to give. And with every time it happened, I felt like I was losing a little piece of myself. The emotional toll was becoming unbearable. I didn't want to be the type of partner who demanded control over every little thing, but at the same time, I needed him to respect my boundaries, to acknowledge my feelings and act accordingly. And yet I was left questioning myself, wondering if I was too demanding, too fragile, too caught up in my insecurities. It became harder and harder to differentiate between my gut feeling that something was off and my growing self-doubt. I started to feel like I was drowning in my own insecurities, in the fear of not being enough, in the constant struggle for respect and emotional safety. And with every boundary he crossed, my trust in him, in us, began to fray at the edges. It's strange how quickly guilt can become a habit when you're living in constant uncertainty. For a while, I told myself that I wouldn't snoop, that I would respect his privacy, and that I should trust him. But every time a boundary was crossed, every time I felt that sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, I couldn't help myself. I started checking his phone, his messages, his browser history, things I had promised myself I wouldn't do, and every time it felt like a betrayal to myself. I was invading his privacy, but in my heart, I was just trying to protect myself from further hurt. It wasn't about curiosity or wanting to catch him in the act. It was about seeking reassurance, about trying to find something that would either ease my mind or confirm my fears. I had already been hurt by what I had found before, so the cycle of doubt became even worse. When I didn't snoop, I questioned everything. When I did, I felt like a person I didn't recognize. It was a constant tug of war between my desire to trust him and my need to protect myself. That day when I snooped again, I found myself in that familiar uncomfortable place, staring at his search history, searching for something I couldn't even explain, and that's when I saw it, the same searches, the same patterns, the same type of girl. It wasn't just one or two random searches, it was a clear, consistent habit, and this time, he had added our city's name at the end. My heart dropped, and in that moment, I felt both sickened and justified. I immediately regretted it. I regretted ever letting myself slip into this pattern, this feeling of needing to check, needing to know. But at the same time, I felt validated in my suspicions. I wanted to feel sorry for invading his privacy, but I couldn't. I felt a strange sense of confirmation that my discomfort was real. It wasn't just me being paranoid. It wasn't just me overthinking things. This time, my feelings had a foundation, and that was the hardest part, because it meant that my trust in him was being chipped away piece by piece. I knew that snooping wasn't healthy, that it wasn't something I should be doing, and yet I couldn't stop. It became a way for me to feel like I had some control over a situation that made me feel completely powerless. Every time I found something, I'd go through the same cycle: anger, sadness, and then guilt. I'd tell myself that this was it. I wouldn't snoop again. But the next time I felt that tightness in my chest, that doubt creeping in, I couldn't help myself. I hated that I was doing this. I hated that my insecurities had led me down this path. But I hated even more that the trust I had once freely given to him now felt fragile, like it was slipping through my fingers every time I found something that didn't align with the boundaries we'd set. It wasn't just about the content. It was about the fact that I was no longer sure if I could trust him. And that made everything else feel like a betrayal. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The discovery, the doubts, the hurt, it had all built up, and I couldn't keep pretending I was fine. The moment I found those searches, my emotions overwhelmed me, and I knew it was time to confront him. I had to stop letting the silence between us grow, had to face the truth of what was happening in our relationship. It wasn't an easy conversation to start. I sat him down, my heart pounding in my chest, and told him everything: how I felt, what I had found, how deeply it had hurt me. I tried to stay calm, to explain how it wasn't about the content itself, but about the pattern I had seen, the repeated crossing of boundary we had set together. I told him how his actions made me feel inadequate, like I wasn't enough, and how the emotional distance between us was growing, despite everything I had tried to do to keep us close. His reaction was not what I expected. He didn't apologize, not immediately. Instead, he looked at me, almost confused, as though he couldn't understand why I was upset. "It's just some searches, some images," he said. "It doesn't mean anything. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of it." That was the moment I realized just how deeply our perspectives had diverged. What I saw as a breach of trust, as a painful disregard for my feelings, he saw as nothing more than a harmless habit. In his mind, it wasn't cheating, it wasn't a violation, it was just part of the internet, part of a normal routine. I tried to explain again, tried to make him understand how much it hurt, how it wasn't just about the actions, but the emotional impact they had on me, on us. But even then, he didn't fully get it. He told me he didn't see the problem, that it was just looking, and that I shouldn't worry so much. "You're the only one I'm with, the only one I love," he reassured me, but it didn't feel like enough. The words were hollow, an attempt to placate me, to brush off the discomfort that I had been carrying. I wanted him to hear me, to understand the weight of what I was saying, but it felt like I was talking to a wall. The worst part of that conversation wasn't what he said. It was the realization that he didn't understand how deeply I needed him to acknowledge my feelings. It wasn't about what he did online, it was about the emotional disconnect I felt, his unwillingness to truly hear me. He didn't respect the boundary I had set, and in doing so he made me feel like my feelings didn't matter. It hurt more than I could express. In the end, the conversation didn't resolve anything. He apologized, in a way, but it felt like a shallow gesture, a way to smooth things over without truly confronting the underlying issues. I walked away feeling more alone than I had before, unsure if I could trust him to ever truly respect my boundaries, unsure if I could ever feel safe in this relationship again. As the days passed after the confrontation, I couldn't shake the weight of the conversation we had. Despite his apology, despite his reassurances, I was left with a gnawing sense of doubt, a feeling that I couldn't ignore. I found myself replaying the conversation in my mind over and over again, wondering where things had gone wrong, questioning myself and my feelings. Was I being too sensitive? Was I asking too much? It felt like I was caught in this constant tug of war, between my desire to trust him and my growing insecurities. On one hand, I knew deep down that I deserved someone who would respect my boundaries, someone who would acknowledge my feelings, and not dismiss them. But on the other hand, I loved him, and part of me wanted to believe that his actions didn't mean what they seemed to. I didn't want to believe that he could betray my trust, that our love wasn't as solid as I thought it was. But every time I looked at him, I couldn't stop questioning everything. I would ask myself, do I trust him anymore? How could I, when he had crossed my boundaries so many times, when he seemed incapable of truly understanding why it hurt me? I felt like I was stuck in this cycle of doubt and confusion, constantly second-guessing my own emotions. And then there was the part of me that wondered if this was all my fault. Was I being too possessive, too controlling? I had always prided myself on being understanding, on being the partner who was easygoing, the one who didn't get jealous or insecure. But with each boundary he crossed, with each new violation, I felt like a part of me was crumbling. I started to believe that maybe I wasn't as confident as I thought I was. Maybe my low self-esteem had made me too sensitive, too easily hurt. But that thought, that nagging voice telling me it was all my fault, was hard to shake. I had always struggled with my self-worth, always wondered if I was enough. And now, it felt like my worst fear was coming true, that I wasn't enough, not for him, not for anyone. I had started to internalize his disregard for my feelings, making it feel like a reflection of my own inadequacies. I had told him how his actions made me feel, but somewhere along the way, I started questioning whether those feelings were valid at all. It was a constant battle between wanting to preserve the relationship, to hold on to the love we shared, and the need to protect my own heart, to set boundaries that were respected. How could I trust someone who repeatedly dismissed my boundaries? How could I stay in a relationship where I felt like my feelings weren't valued? I was torn between my desire for love and my need for respect, between my fear of being alone and my fear of losing myself. I couldn't keep living in the middle of this emotional limbo, torn between love and self-preservation. The constant questioning, the lingering doubt, the fear of betrayal, it was too much. I knew something had to change. I had spent so much time trying to figure out where I had gone wrong, how I could fix this, how I could make him understand. But what I was really avoiding was the most important question: what do I need to feel safe, to feel respected, to feel whole? For the first time in a long time, I realized that the answer to that question didn't lie in him. It didn't lie in trying to fix the relationship, or convince him to respect my boundaries. The answer lay within me. I needed to choose myself. I had spent so much of our relationship trying to make him see me, trying to make him understand how his actions affected me. But I had neglected to ask myself the same question: what do I need in this relationship to feel valued? What do I need to maintain my sense of self-worth? I had sacrificed so much of my own emotional well-being trying to accommodate him, trying to ignore the feelings of hurt and insecurity that had been growing inside me. But I couldn't keep doing that. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when my heart was slowly breaking. Choosing myself wasn't easy. It wasn't about abandoning the relationship, or walking away from him completely. It was about reclaiming my voice, my sense of self, and my boundaries. It was about standing up for my own worth, and saying, I deserve to be loved in a way that respects who I am, and what I need. It was about finally giving myself permission to set boundaries that were non-negotiable, and to walk away if those boundaries continued to be crossed. It was hard. Every part of me wanted to keep believing in him, in us. Every part of me wanted to hold on to the love we had shared, to hold on to the vision of what I thought our future would look like. But I realized that love, real love, isn't about sacrificing your own needs and comfort for someone else. It's about mutual respect, understanding, and compromise. It's about both people showing up fully, willing to meet each other's needs with kindness, empathy, and respect. I knew I couldn't keep sacrificing my self-worth just to keep the relationship intact. I had to be willing to let go of the fear of being alone, the fear of facing a future without him. I had to trust that, no matter what happened, I was enough. I had to trust that, if this relationship wasn't going to honor me, then it wasn't meant to be. So, I made a choice. I chose myself. I chose to stop living in the shadow of doubt and insecurity. I chose to prioritize my emotional well-being, my peace of mind, and my sense of self-worth. Whether I stayed or left, I knew that this was the beginning of something important, my own healing, my own growth, and my own journey toward self-love. It wasn't an easy decision, and even now, I find myself looking back at everything with a mix of sadness and relief. But in choosing myself, I began to see a side of me I hadn't known in a long time, the woman who knew her worth, who wasn't willing to settle for anything less than respect and love. It felt empowering to finally acknowledge that I deserved more than just words. I deserved actions that aligned with my needs, my feelings, my values. The hardest part of moving forward wasn't just the fear of being alone. It was realizing that I had allowed my sense of self-worth to be so entangled with someone else's actions, someone else's validation, that I forgot how to define myself on my own terms. I had spent so much time focusing on the relationship, on trying to fix what was broken, that I lost sight of who I was outside of it. But in choosing myself, I started to rebuild, piece by piece, step by step. I began to recognize the strength within me. The strength to stand up for my boundary, to speak my truth, and to trust that I was worthy of being heard. I didn't need to keep compromising myself for the sake of someone else's comfort. I had my own needs, my own desires, and it was okay to prioritize them. In fact, it was necessary. And as I embraced that truth, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, as though a part of me that had been buried for so long was finally allowed to breathe. The journey wasn't instantaneous. There were days when doubt crept in, when I questioned whether I had made the right choice, when I longed for the familiarity of the life I once knew. But as time went on, I realized that the only person who could give me the peace I was seeking was me. I couldn't keep waiting for someone else to validate my worth. I had to do that for myself. I had to trust that I was enough, exactly as I was. With each passing day, I began to reclaim the pieces of myself that had been lost. I rediscovered my passions, the things that made me feel alive, the hobbies, the friendships, the dreams that had been put on hold. I surrounded myself with people who saw me, who respected me, and who reminded me of my own value. And slowly, I began to feel whole again, not because of a relationship or a partner, but because of who I was at my core. Choosing myself didn't mean that I had given up on love. It didn't mean that I was closing myself off from the possibility of being loved in the future. It meant that I was no longer willing to settle for anything less than a love that honored my worth, a love that respected my boundary. And in doing so, I created space for a love that could come from a place of mutual respect, equality, and trust. This was the beginning of my new chapter, one where I no longer relied on external validation, but where I embraced my own worth, my own strength, and my own potential. It wasn't an ending, but a new beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next.